Hello students, my name is Leena Shinde. I have done my masters in biotechnology. I have been teaching and training teachers for the last 10 years. I also deal with school operations and school management. Students, today we are going to learn about cell as the fundamental unit of life and also about the cell theory. The study of cells is known as cell biology. It is a vast field and today it is greatly advanced and many people work on it. But how did it all start and why did it come to become so advanced? Let us learn more about it. As we know, all living organisms, whether unicellular or multicellular, are composed of cells. But before we move on to the explanation of cells, we need to know the difference between living organisms and non-living organisms. You must have already studied it. Living organisms have 7 characteristics and these are represented by an acronym that is called Mrs. Gren. Can you guess what each of these characteristics are? Let us look at each of them. The first one is movement. All living organisms must move. Animals move so that they can go from one place to another. This is known as locomotions. Plants also show movement, but it is not locomotion. Plants move with respect to sunlight. This is known as phototropism. The next one, respiration. All living organisms must respire. We all breathe in and breathe out, and the food that we intake undergoes respiration to give us energy. This is one of the most important things for living organism. The next one, sensitivity. Or it is also known as response to stimuli. If you ever touch something hot, you know that your hand burns. This is nothing but a response to stimuli. Our skin cells have specialized receptors which receive the heat that is there from a hot substance. These receptors then in turn go into our brain and the brain gives the signal back through which we say maybe an ouch or maybe we scream. But that is what sensitivity is. If you have ever looked at a touch-me-not plant, which is also known as the Mimosa pudica, you will know that when we touch its leaves, the leaves close. Sensitivity is one of the most important things that a living organism can possess. If you look at your laptop, if you touch it, does it respond to you? Probably not. Maybe yes, the keys respond and you get something typed on a MS Word, but it does not really respond to you. Similarly, if you look at a table, does it respire? You might just say that maybe if I run a steam engine, the steam engine throws out steam. That means it is throwing out air or water vapor. But that is not respiration. Respiration is a metabolic activity. If you also look at movement, does a table move? We can always say that if I kick a ball, the ball has moved, but that is because of force. The ball does not move on its own and doesn't require to do so. Hence, it is non-living. The next one is growth. All living things need to grow. The growth happens because we derive nutrition from our food. For example, a baby when just born is very small in size. Then it grows into an infant, then into a young child, then into a young adult, and then into an adult, and then into an old person. This is growth. The lifespan of a person starts from his or her birth to his or her death. But during this lifespan, they continue to grow. Even trees grow. If you have ever seen a tree which is cut, if you look at the girth, you will see concentric circles. This is nothing but the cork cambium, and this tells us how old the tree is. But the tree continues to grow throughout its life. Reproduction. All living things must reproduce. This is because they need to continue their species. So, a cat will give birth to a kitten, a hen will give birth to a chick, a human being will give birth to a baby, a lion will give birth to a cub. Next is excretion. All living things derive nutrition. Then they derive this nutrition and then they utilize it by the process of respiration. But when the process of respiration is undertaken in the body, there are some waste materials which are produced. These need to be excreted out. If not, they can be toxic to the body and eventually even fatal. That means an organism can die. For example, if you have seen an amoeba takes in food and through the process of phagocytosis also gives out the food. Human beings also excrete. So do all other animals. In fact, we also excrete through our skin. Sweat is nothing but one of the excretions that is not required by our body. The last but not the least is nutrition. All living things derive nutrition. Based on the type of nutrition, living beings can be categorized into carnivores, omnivores and herbivores. Herbivores are animals that derive nutrition only from plants. For example, a deer eats grass or a grasshopper also eats some plants and grass. The next is of course carnivores. You know that most wild animals are carnivores. These are lion, tiger, wolf, hyena, vulture, etc. Then there comes omnivores. Omnivores are animals which practically eat anything. We humans are omnivores. We practically eat anything. So does a crow, a peacock and a pig. These are all categorized as omnivores. Now, based on the nutrition, animals are also categorized as autotrophic and heterotrophic. Autotrophic are animals or organisms which prepare their own food. Plants come in this category. Heterotrophic nutrition is a mode of nutrition in which an organism will derive nutrition from another organism. So here we categorize them as we learnt earlier. Animals are categorized into herbivores, carnivores and omnivores. They are all heterotrophic modes of nutrition. There are some other modes of nutrition like saprophytic, but we are not going to learn that as it is not the scope of the lesson. But let's move ahead. As we said, cell is the fundamental unit of life. But what made us so sure of this particular funda? Let's see how. As we say, cell is the fundamental unit of life. But is our body only made up of cells? No. Cells are further grouped into tissues. Tissues are nothing but cells which are of the same embryonic origin and perform the same function. That means, for example, our cardiac tissues perform the function of rhythmically moving, but these are of the same embryonic origin, as in cardiac muscles are of the same type. They are striated. Next comes organs. Tissues when grouped together form organs. For example, the heart is composed of many tissues. The next is the organ system. When multiple organs come together to perform a particular function for a particular system, it is known as organ system. For example, we have the cardiovascular system, which consists of the heart and the blood network. Then, multiple organ systems compose an organism. For example, human beings have the cardiac system, the digestive system, the nervous system. As we know, an organism is composed of multiple organ systems. For example, we human beings are composed of many systems ranging from the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, the muscular skeletal system. Now, this organism lives in a particular habitat. For example, the habitat that humans live in is known as our neighborhood. Animals like lions or tigers or deers live in a different habitat. They are wild animals, they may live in forests. Each animal has a particular space in which it will thrive and flourish. This is known as their habitat. An organism lives in a particular habitat. A habitat is nothing but an area in which an organism can thrive and flourish. Thriving and flourishing means the organism finds adequate food, shelter, and of course nutrition, because of which it can grow and it can reproduce. This becomes a habitat for that particular organism. Multiple habitats form ecosystems. That means different animals which live in different habitats form a particular ecosystem. Multiple ecosystems form the biosphere. Now this is the structure of living things, but the fundamental structure of living things remains the cell. So let us look at what a cell is and how it came to be and who found out more about these cells. Again, I repeat that cell is a basic unit of light, but who found that out? There were two scientists, A.G. Lowy and P. Sienkiewicz. These were the first scientists to find out more about cells. They stated that a unit of biological activity delimited by a medium and capable of self-reproduction in a medium free of other living systems is a cell. So, to put it lucidly, what they meant was that a cell is capable of self-reproduction. Okay? A cell is capable of reproducing in a medium which does not have any other organism, and of course the cell is the structural and fundamental unit of life. Later on, Robert Hooke was the first person who found out more about cells in detail. He published that in his book called Microphagia, which was published in 1665. What he studied was cork cells. If you know of cork, cork is a dead plant tissue and you generally use it to close bottles. So he took a cross section of the cork cells, he observed it using a very rudimentary microscope, and what he found was that these cells showed a honeycomb pattern. They were thick walled and they were box-like compartments. The thick walled was due to the material what we now called as lignin, and he also concluded that these cells were passages for conducting fluids. He also studied further using different plant cells. He had very rudimentary equipments. He used dim lights, primitive cutting tool experiments. He used lenses with aberrations, but he was able to still study these cells in detail, and his work became the basis for other scientists to move ahead. This is why cell study was undertaken. The next scientist who did major work on cell was Anton von Leeuwenhoek. He is very important because he was the first person to view a live cell under a microscope. The next scientist was Robert Brown. He did further studies and was able to identify that cells have nucleus. He studied the orchid root. Duttret was another scientist who studied the mimosa plant. Again, we know what a mimosa plant is, and he was able to derive few more things. Moll was a scientist who found out about protoplasm by working on cells. Now, this was the basic research that was done. As science advanced, cell theory came into being. Let us see how. In 1838 and 1839, two scientists called Matthias Sheldon and Theodor Schwann were the first people to observe cells with a nuclei. What they concluded was that cell is the basic unit of life. The next scientist who did the same study was Rudolf Virchow. He came to the conclusion that all living cells arise from pre-existing cells. That means each cell will not derive or come out on its own. It needed a cell which was already present, and this aims at reproduction. The next scientist, and we all know Louis Pasteur very fondly because he is the person who founded pasteurization and it is widely used to pasteurize milk. He confirmed Rudolf Virchow's theory. 20 years later, several other scientists kind of concluded this research, and the crude idea of cell theory became very, very solid. Now let us look at what the cell theory actually says. Again, we repeat that cell is the unit of structure in all living beings. Structure means it could be a skeletal structure in humans, it could be the shape of the body in some organisms, but the structure of a particular organism is completely dependent on its cells. The cell is also the unit of function in all living things. That means a cell functions in a particular fashion, which allows the organism to live in a particular way, without which life would not be possible. The next, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. That means we need a cell to reproduce another cell. Cells are alike in chemical composition and metabolism. This we know because we talk of tissues. For example, the cardiac tissue is made up of a particular protein, and it will also perform a very specific function, that is the beating of the heart. So, they are identical in chemical composition and they probably perform the metabolic activities. Cells are totipotent. That means they can form a whole organism, and this is definitely under a specific set of conditions. I particularly like this particular trait of a cell because it's very interesting. Totipotency is the ability of a cell to regenerate. Can you believe that a lizard, when its tail is cut accidentally or by own, can regenerate its own tail? That happens because of totipotency. Imagine if we could use the same principle to generate organs, to regenerate our own cells. That would lead to anti-aging, that would also lead to longevity. Isn't this a very interesting fact? So, like I again said, cell theory was the fundamental research that was conducted so that scientists today could study cell biology.